Good morning, everyone. Here's your Mormon news update for September 12th, 2024. First, we will go to Maryland, where the highest court in the state heard oral arguments on Tuesday over the constitutionality of a recent law that removes statute of limitations from civil child SA lawsuits, allowing survivors to file claims regardless of how much time has passed. The Maryland Child Victims Act was passed in April of 2023. The state law allows claims to be filed against abusers and institutions that enabled the misconduct even decades after the acts occurred. The legislation has been hailed as a landmark achievement for survivors of childhood SA, since many individuals are unable to reach a point where they seek justice until long after the typical statute of limitations has expired. Maryland lawmakers knew the law would face legal challenges and included a provision that allowed an interlocutory appeal to be immediately pursued, so that the Maryland Supreme Court could consider the case before any individual lawsuits result in a final judgment. In May, the Maryland Supreme Court announced it would hear a challenge to the law's constitutionality that was brought by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and several hours of oral arguments were presented on September 10th. The Mormon Church faces a lawsuit filed since the act was passed, alleging that the church did nothing to stop a minister from assaulting a young girl, even after a probation officer warned the organization that the minister, Frederick Edvilson, should not be left alone with children. Edvilson pled guilty to felony charges in 1985 and is now deceased. However, the civil lawsuit filed against the Mormon Church said the organization failed to take minimal steps to keep the girl safe. Immediately after the lawsuit was filed, the Mormon Church challenged the Maryland Child Victims Act's constitutionality, arguing that the underlying claim should be time-barred since the removal of the Maryland statute of limitations on child SA lawsuits violates due process protections. I do wish the church cared about the victims more than it cared about its bottom line. Let's learn more about Frederick Edvilson, though. From floodlit.org, it says, Frederick Edvilson was a Mormon church member in Utah and Maryland. From the 1940s to the 1970s, Edvilson worked for the U.S. Navy Oceanographic Office in Suitland, Maryland. Edvilson was a scout leader for 25 years in Maryland, including a scoutmaster. This may have been in an LDS church-sponsored scouting unit. In 1977, Edvilson co-wrote the Inspired Version Study Guide, a key to the significant changes. The guide cataloged the changes Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church, made to the King James Bible, commonly known as Joseph Smith's New Translation of the Bible or the Inspired Version. In 1980, Edvilson was living in Maryland. While living in Maryland, Edvilson helped establish and manage the LDS Cannery and Welfare Center in Forestville, Maryland. In the 1980s, Edvilson was convicted 3 times of child SA in Prince George's County, Maryland. In January 1983, while on probation for his second conviction, Edvilson groomed a 10-year-old girl and began assaulting her in a room inside a Mormon chapel. The abuse took place on multiple occasions between January 1983 and October 1984. Edvilson reportedly told her he was giving her special religious training. Edvilson was sentenced in 1985 to 8 years in prison, but moved to Pleasant Grove, Utah in 1986 per his obituary. In 1987, Edvilson lost a civil lawsuit and was ordered to pay the plaintiffs $10,000. While living in Pleasant Grove, Edvilson served as a Mormon high priest, secretary, and home teacher in the 6th Ward in the Garden Grove Stake. He also served as a stake missionary in the Timpanogos Stake and spent 7 years in the Church Locator Center in American Fork, Utah. Edvilson died in Utah in 2009 at the age of 88. His obituary said he passed away peacefully at home. In 2023, the victim of the 1983 to 84 abuse sued the LDS Church in U.S. District Court in Greenbelt, Maryland. Her attorney was quoted in a March 2024 Baltimore Sun article as saying, "The church itself, who let this known predator hang around kids, has never been held to account." And they are doing everything they can to make sure that they never are. Now let's go to a great article in Salt Lake City Weekly written by Keith Burns. He says, in 1852, Brigham Young, second prophet president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, implemented a ban on people of African descent holding the priesthood and accessing temple rituals, both of which are required for entrance into the highest degree of heaven in LDS theology. Grounded in Protestant biblical justifications of slavery and racial hierarchy, LDS authorities for decades argued that whiteness whiteness was a sign of divine favor and the mark of a chosen race. Conversely, blackness was purportedly the mark of a divine curse or, unique to LDS doctrine, the result of poor decisions in a premortal existence. Although many members and leaders now describe the ban as simply a policy, a theory, or even folklore, mid-20th century LDS leaders enshrined it as divine doctrine on numerous occasions. The most notable example of this was a 1949 statement issued by the First Presidency, the highest governing body of the church, declaring, and I am going to read this as it's written, realizing that the language in here is offensive. It says, "The attitude of the church with reference to the Negroes remains as it has always stood. It is not a matter of the declaration of a policy, but of direct commandment from the Lord, that Negroes may become members of the church, but that they are not entitled to the priesthood at the present time." Matthew Harris, a historian of Mormon studies, has spent decades meticulously documenting race relations in the LDS Church, including the eventful historical trajectory of this priesthood and temple ban. In his recent bestseller, Second Class Saints, Black Mormons and the Struggle for Racial Equality, he masterfully lays out the complex array of political, socio-cultural, and religious factors that impacted the development and eventual lifting of the ban in 1978. I actually bought a copy of the book, and I can't wait to start reading it. I'll let you know how it goes when I do. Back to the article. Not only was the church confronted on its racism by a host of external forces, including the media, the federal government, and academic scholars, there were also courageous internal agitators from rank-and-file lay members to mid-level church employees, all the way up to apostles in its highest governing body. Harris's book provides vivid details on this activism and dissent, including by First Presidency counselor Hugh B. Brown, who fought tirelessly to lift the ban until his death in 1975. Surely, one of the most profound takeaways from this dark chapter in LDS history is that racial teachings long codified as eternal doctrine are now disavowed as theories advanced in the past or described as outdated policies, demonstrating a compelling historical and theological blueprint for change within the LDS Church. I see where this author is going with this, and I agree with him, but I also remember when Kate Kelly came forward with a similar argument, saying that the prophets should go to God and ask him if women could have the priesthood, because back in 1978, they asked God if they could lift the racist ban that barred black men from the priesthood and black people in general from being in the temple. And we all know what happened to Kate Kelly. She was excommunicated for pushing for the brethren to ask God, just as they did with the priesthood and temple ban. Back to the article. Reflecting on the immeasurable pain, exclusion, and oppression that Latter-day Saints of color have experienced as a result of this odious ban compels us to examine similar discriminatory hierarchies in the modern church that privilege and elevate male, cisgender heterosexuality. Currently, people in same-sex relationships and people who have undergone physical or social gender transitions are prohibited from exercising the priesthood and entering the temple. Women are barred from holding the priesthood. Like prior justifications of the race ban, LDS authorities appeal to God as the author of teachings that same-sex relationships and gender transitions are sinful. By putting the onus on God, LDS leaders simultaneously shore up the credibility and strength of these teachings while deflecting responsibility and agency away from themselves. LDS leaders are quick to throw God under the bus when it comes to teachings that they have that are racist, bigoted, homophobic, and harmful. The next paragraph says, in addition to prohibiting transgender members from exercising the priesthood and entering the temple, the church recently enacted a series of changes to the General Handbook that further marginalize and exclude trans people. These include mandating specific bathroom usage, requiring trans individuals to attend gender-specific meetings according to their assigned biological sex, not their actual gender identity, prohibiting trans youth from attending most overnight activities, and barring trans adults from serving as teachers or working with children. These sanctions feed into a broader political and cultural atmosphere that dehumanize, stigmatize, and other trans people as dangerous and predatory toward children. In actuality, cisgender men are far more likely to be perpetrators of sexual violence and assault, and frankly, are the most deserving of bathroom restrictions and prohibitions on working with youth. Seems we just read a story that details that well. If you are a Latter-day Saint and, like myself, oppose the current priesthood temple ban and other restrictions on women and LGBTQ people, what are some steps you can take? This fellow is getting into some dangerous territory here. Like I said, Kate Kelly did something very similar and was excommunicated quite quickly. Just as courageous members of the 20th century did, express your dissenting opinions confidently and openly in church circles, whether formally in Sunday school or informally amongst friends and colleagues. Respectful and honest discourse concerning these topics is vital to progress and change. Yes, it is. I have observed that openly expressing disagreements over harmful and exclusionary teachings has gradually become a more normal and acceptable aspect of church participation. I hope he's right. I haven't been to a full meeting since 2018, so I don't know if the culture has changed significantly in that amount of time enough to allow dissenting opinions to be spoken at church, but I really hope he's right. He says, if you are a local leader, I would challenge you to be radically inclusive and allow same-sex couples and trans individuals to have the same access to callings as cisgender heterosexual members. You would be joining a small but crucial group of bishops and stake presidents who disobey institutional mandates they deem discriminatory. If you are opposed to doing that, at least strive to prioritize the well-being of your congregants as much as possible over institutional policies and practices. From an institutional perspective, I would also call upon LDS leaders to stop pairing cisgender heterosexuality with faithfulness and morality in the same way they gradually untethered race from theological frameworks in recent decades. Simply put, one's access to church rituals, service positions, and leadership opportunities should not be determined by a gender transition, one's gender, sexual identity, or one's romantic relationships, and should solely be determined by the content of one's character and abilities. I sincerely yearn and actively fight for the day when the church will change their policies and teachings so that all people, regardless of gender, sexual identity, or romantic relationships, will have equal access to all rituals and positions of power within the church. Bravo, Mr. Keith Burns. I agree. I think that you are brave to stand up, and I hope there are a lot more like you within the rank and file members of the Mormon Church. And last up today, another quote about narcissists that applies to the Mormon Church. It says, narcissists have absolutely zero regard for how you feel. Instead, they have a sense of entitlement to your time, energy, and resources. You are not the issue, even if the narcissist wants you to feel like you are. And that's your update for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.